What lengths a criminal would go to keep from justice, do you know? Tatsuya Ichihashi is more than just the cold shoulder of a chilling crime. He is remembered for making the effort to cover his tracks. Ichihashi began a dark and wistful path of despotry after he took the life of Lindsay Ann Hawker, a young English teacher in Japan. He was obsessed with escape. He did grotesque, self-inflicted surgeries on his face to try and escape the authorities. This is not just a case of murder. It's about human fear and the depths of human cunning. If a killer were to stand next to you, would you know it? What would someone do to disappear? Lindsay Ann Hawker was born into a loving couple of Bill and Julia Hawker who lived in Coventry in England. The Hawker family was from close by on the nearby village of Brandon, Warwickshire, where Lindsay grew up to become a bright and determined young woman, and the village itself would watch. I do have fond memories of listening to her speaking and literature teacher, Ms. Coke, at King Henry VIII School in Coventry, where Lindsay showed amazing passion for learning and a phenomenal intellect. With this passion, she quickly enrolled herself in the University of Leeds to do biology, no sailings, and increasingly, her efforts bore fruit. She graduated in 2006 with a first-class honors degree, courtesy of her hard work and ambition. Lindsay has plans to take on a master's degree, but elected to put it off for a little more life experience and adventure first. Kazuaki's decision to go to Japan led her in a country she found fascinated with the unusual blend of tradition and modernity. She joined NOVA, Japan's largest English conversation school, in October of 2006, when it had 20 branches, one in Tokyo, and was stationed in Koiwa, Tokyo. This was not a job for Lindsay, but something to dip into a new culture, make new people, and improving yourself as a teacher. But life in Japan was a new, exciting chapter, and Lindsay shared an apartment with two other foreign females teachers. All of them were somehow part of a small, supportive community of expatriates living in a busy and bustling metropolis of Tokyo. She spent many of her days teaching eager students who looked up to her as a knowledgeable, kind instructor, and many of her evenings in exploration, new experiences, and phone calls home to family. Bill and Julia, she said, kept in touch with her by email, Skype, and phone calls. Her parents cherished these moments, feeling comforted by the sound of her voice and reassured by her happiness abroad. But on a March day in March 2007, Lindsay's absence from communication was immediately a cause for concern. It was unsettling when Lindsay doesn't reach out to her parents. She could always do that. Hours became days, and silence became deafening. Her family's distress deepened. They knew something was wrong. Lindsay was a good person who would have never worried her loved ones for nothing, without reason. And so, the search for answers began. The nightmare which would affect not only the Hawker family, but the international community. In keeping with a mood of egocentric reckoning, Lindsay's disappearance now became the first installment in a nightmare tale of loss, pursuit, and the need for justice. Tatsuya Ichihashi was born as a son of Ichihashi Region, Gifu Prefecture, Japan, to parents on January 5, 1979. From the outside, Ichihashi's life looked privileged as he grew up in Gifu, then moved on to Chiba Prefecture, east of Tokyo. He was only that child of a quite rich family. His mom was a dentist, his father was a medical doctor, so everything about his rich upbringing was definitely all right and stable. Even in this snug space, however, Ichihashi's life was not ordinary. In 2005, he graduated from Chiba University's horticulture department, but did not seem very passionately to pursue the subject afterwards. He instead received the equivalent of $600 or $760 a month, living off a basic $100,000 a month allowance provided by his parents. In Ichikawa, Chiba, Ichihashi lived a quiet and detached life while his peers were making their careers or planning their futures. He didn't search for regular employment, and he didn't make questionable progress towards independence. While some knew him as a loner who kept mostly to himself, according to police reports and accounts, Ichihashi was described as a loner who kept mostly to himself. His interactions were minimal and often disconnected, revealing little about his inner world. Beneath the surface, however, there were signs that hinted at an unsettling darkness. But Ichihashi had been in legal trouble 6 years before poor Lindsay Hawker was tragically killed. Her beau had gotten into a run-in, involving theft and injury. He'd been involved in a robbery on the street, where he had assaulted another man. But this incident never escalated to a formal conviction, and it was settled out of court, so Ichihashi escaped much bigger consequences. Though it didn't make headlines at the time, this event foreshadowed a violence and impulsivity that would become much clearer. Ichihashi was 28 years old when the murder was committed, and he was living in a modest Ichikawa apartment. Reporters who knew him around said were taken with his careful presentation, his shy, even withdrawn nature, qualities that also concealed his darker, more deeply troubling ones. A year-long relationship with a Japanese woman was the closest he ever got to a relationship, despite that no one knew anything personal or the depths of his emotional struggle. Like others, his girlfriend saw the surface, a reserved, enigmatic man. Ichihashi was obsessed with being physically fit. Even at the gym, he would work out with rigorous workouts and cycle for as many as 25 kilometers a day. However, he was muscular and strong, traits he was obviously cultivating with a single-mindedness mightness. In later years, some reporters would speculate that this was all part of fitness and discipline that he had drilled into himself, and it might also have contributed to ability to thwart the authorities when the time came. His days were routine and solitude. He enjoyed being alone and never became close to anyone, so it is a wonder why anyone got to know him as well as they did. Some described him as polite and reserved. Others felt as though something was simmering beneath the surface that never properly came into play until it did, and it was bad. On March 24, 2007, Lindsay Ann Hawker disappeared. What followed was a series of events that would shock and horrify both Japan and the world. The reserved man, once living off his parents' allowance and cycling the streets of Ichikawa, transformed into one of the most wanted fugitives in the country. The transition from quiet recluse to the centerpiece of a chilling manhunt painted a haunting portrait of the complexities within Tatsuya Ichihashi. The man, who was once just a solitary figure cycling through the streets, now embodied a story of evasion, manipulation, and the desperate lengths one would go to remain free. Lindsay Ann Hawker's days in Tokyo were typically filled with teaching, exploration, and moments of joy that she shared through calls and emails to her loved ones back home in England. Yet, amidst the vibrant life she led in Japan, a brief, seemingly innocuous encounter would change everything. In an email to her boyfriend back in England, Lindsay recounted an unusual meeting with a man named Tatsuya Ichihashi. The message hinted at an encounter that initially seemed odd but harmless, an encounter that, just days later, would become the center of a harrowing and tragic story. It began during one of Lindsay's regular train journeys home from work. The busy, hurried pace of Tokyo's transit was familiar, filled with the overlapping sounds of announcements and the low hum of conversations. It was here, amidst the chaos of commuters, that Ichihashi approached her. At first, his introduction was strange. He claimed she was his English teacher. Lindsay, a professional and caring person, knew he was mistaken but handled the situation politely. She must have felt a mix of confusion and discomfort, yet she brushed it off as a harmless encounter with an eccentric stranger. However, it didn't end there. Ichihashi followed Lindsay in the dimly lit streets as she rode home from her commute. When they reached her residence, he caught up with her and asked for a glass of water, with an air of vulnerability. Lindsay was also compassionate, a trait that defined her, but maybe that was also where her instinct was to be cautious. Despite the general lack of prudence, she allowed him in, trusting humanity even as she sowed it. In addition, she would ensure to introduce him to her two flatmates before coming into her own, showing how well aware and careful of her safety she was. The two performed almost like they were in another world once inside. I could sense that Ichihashi's demeanor had progressed. Pulling out a new sketch pad, he sketched Lindsay's portrait. It was strange, not alarming, although many such moments are scattered about like pennies in the streets of many a city. The final touch was for him. Sign his name, telephone number, email address featured down the bottom for later importance. Such a small act would now be something he wouldn't be able to escape from, something that would bind him and Lindsay in a way that no one could have possibly seen coming. The conversation began, and they had a deal. Thus, he agreed with Ichihashi that he would come meet him in a local cafe 4 days later for an English lesson. The Nova School allowed such private lessons, and Lindsay had earned them her teaching way. She sent her boyfriend an email about the encounter that was part bemusement and part casual, as though it were another strange and mundane day in Tokyo. Those 4 days passed, filled with Lindsay's regular routines and her plans for the future. To those around her, life seemed normal, filled with the same vibrant energy she always carried. But beneath this surface, unknown to her or anyone else, a sinister thread had been woven into her story. Ichihashi, who had seemed no more than an eccentric stranger with a penchant for art, was harboring intentions far darker than anyone could have imagined. On March 24, 2007, the beginning of the Lindsay Ann Hawker Tatsuya Ichihashi meeting was a fairly normal start to the day, which would, within a very short time, spiral into one of the most extraordinary days imaginable. It's true that Hawker, a committed English teacher, wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary, but she was walking into danger. Building in the bustling cafe that was difficult to see as being anything other than completely normal. There might have been flow to the conversation, the kind she gave her students. What happened next was another step even deeper into a situation that was about to take a sinister turn. Hawker and Ichihashi then take taxi to his apartment, which was only a short distance from the cafe. Daylight, the city was alive with everyone rising up and making noise and buzzing about us like a hive as the weekends typically did. Hawker, nonetheless, kept one hand on the taxi driver's arm, suggesting she planned the visit to be brief, ever cautious, and then told the taxi driver to wait outside while she went inside. Confident she would be back soon, she entered Ichihashi's apartment. But the minutes moved on, and the taxi driver, having seen her from his seat, did not see her. It took 7 long minutes for Lindsay not to show up, at which point he eventually drove off, taking with him what became the last external witness of Lindsay Hawker alive. It wasn't until days later that the true horror of the events of that apartment started to come out. Hawker's body was found buried on the balcony, buried in a bathtub filled with compost soil and sand, said to have had a shovel carved into it. The grim scene smacked of a deliberate very last-ditch bid to hide her death. Bruises covered her torso and her body was tied with plastic ties and scarves. They spoke of a brutal struggle over a long period of time. You could still see a hard, deliberate blow to her face, an egg-sized bruise that would have covered her entire left cheek. Other marks on her body indicated that she had been slammed into furniture during the attack, and the coroner's findings revealed that her death occurred when Ichihashi, in a fit of rage, strangled her with such force that the cartilage in her neck snapped. Lindsay's death was followed by further chilling acts. After killing her, Ichihashi shaved her head, perhaps an attempt at further control or a grim ritual of his own. Her belongings were found scattered around the apartment, stark reminders of the moments before her life was violently taken. The method Ichihashi used to bury her was both resourceful and macabre. Media initially reported that he buried her body in sand, but later reports revealed a more disturbing detail. Ichihashi had used a mix of compost and sand and then sprayed it with a chemical designed for compacting and decomposing waste. This indicated a dark, calculated mindset. He was either planning to encase her body in concrete or waiting for it to decompose enough to be disposed of later. The investigation revealed that Ichihashi made 6 separate visits to a local hardware store in the hours following Lindsay's death. Each visit added more pieces to his plan as he bought the materials he would later use to conceal his crime. It was only on March 26th that Nova, Lindsay's employer, reported her missing. She had failed to show up for her classes on March 25th and 26th, an uncharacteristic lapse that immediately raised red flags. Friends of Lindsay had already tried to contact the police, but their messages were lost in bureaucratic channels, delaying critical action. When 2 officers were finally dispatched to Ichihashi's apartment at 5:40 p.m., they faced procedural constraints. Without proper cause, they could not knock on his door. Yet, despite the quiet exterior, the officers noticed signs of life inside, shadows that hinted someone was present, even though no lights were visible. Knowing of Ichihashi's previous criminal allegation involving theft and assault, they called for backup at 7:00 p.m., recognizing the potential danger within those walls. By 8:00 p.m., 7 additional officers had gathered outside the building, prepared to confront the suspect. But Ichihashi was already aware of their presence. With calculated calm, he slipped out of the apartment, barefoot and wearing a rucksack, as though ready to head to the gym. The officers, seeing him emerge, acted swiftly. One managed to grab his rucksack, but Ichihashi, quick and athletic, managed to pull free. In that critical moment, the absence of radios among the officers proved to be a costly oversight. Unable to communicate effectively with each other, the officers on the 4th floor could not alert those stationed below. Ichihashi vaulted over the last flight of stairs, landing with a thud on the ground level, and bolted into the street. The officers gave chase, but Ichihashi, with his background in fitness and martial arts, skillfully zigzagged through the narrow streets and managed to evade capture. The rucksack left behind contained gym clothes, hinting that he may have been planning to blend into his routine as a way to throw off suspicion. In the days after Lindsay Ann Hawker's tragic death, Tatsuya Ichihashi's movements and intentions proceeded like a dark, calculated puzzle. Police suspect that Ichihashi moved his bathtub between Sunday night and the early hours of Monday morning, the tub from the bathroom to the balcony and concealing Hawker's body inside. The act, however chilling, was not missed. Later, neighbors said they heard strange sounds, something metallic being struck and something being dragged in a still night. This gives the details a dark image of how far Ichihashi would go to cover his crime and how much planning it took. Later, on March 27, 2007, police obtained an arrest warrant on the charge of abandonment of a body against Ichihashi. They decided to put him on a national wanted list because the situation was so serious. The investigation intensified by March 29th after detectives found a shopping trolley at the apartment building where Ichihashi lived. This mundane object was now evidence, and it was most likely the very means for which Ichihashi had transported the long bags of horticultural soil used to bury Hawker in the bathtub. Distances he went to disguise where her body ended up, the dragged bathtub, the multiple shopping trolley trips, demonstrated the effort he took to smother the crime in a cloak of compost and sand. A raid was carried out by 20 police officers on Hotel Chateau, a love hotel near Nishi Funabashi Station, east of Tokyo, on that same day. Officers searched room after room in a tense atmosphere hoping for a breakthrough. Ichihashi, though, remained elusive. There were traces behind he had vanished. More desperate to keep the public's attention focused on the case, the authorities then released a new and revised wanted poster with another altered image of Ichihashi wearing women's clothing. The hope was that someone, somewhere, might recognize the distinct drawing style or the disguised features and come forward. The investigation continued, but leads were scarce. In early 2008, the police received reports that Ichihashi was seen among the nightlife of Kabukicho, a district known for its LGBTQ+ clubs and entertainment venues. Rumors circulated that he had been tentatively identified by male partners, suggesting he was using different avenues to hide in plain sight. Still, despite this promising lead, the trail went cold. By October 2008, frustration set in, even with 140 officers assigned to the case. Speculation arose within the force that Ichihashi might have taken his own life. Lindsay Hawker's father, however, saw this as a tactic to reduce the investigation's scale, a claim supported by sources within the department. The silence from Japanese authorities to the Hawker family and even the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office added to their frustration and grief. Despite the stagnation, reports persisted. In January 2009, an article in Japan Today cited a source from SPA, a weekly magazine, suggesting that Ichihashi had fled to the Philippines. The authorities, eager to keep the public engaged, launched a bold campaign on the second anniversary of Hawker's death. Life-size cutouts of Ichihashi were distributed, intended to humanize the search and keep his image vivid in people's minds. The turning point came on June 26, 2009, when the Japanese National Police Agency significantly increased the cash reward for any information leading to Ichihashi's arrest. The sum rose from $1 million to a staggering $10 million. This dramatic step was intended to incentivize informants, and it did not go in vain. By November, several informants played key roles in narrowing the search, including employees from an Osaka construction company where Ichihashi had worked and staff from an Osaka ferry company who had noticed someone resembling him. Ichihashi's commitment to evading capture became even more evident when police revealed that he had undergone extensive plastic surgery to alter his appearance. On October 24, 2009, he visited a clinic in Nagoya to uplift his nose. Prior attempts at clinics in Fukuoka had failed, suggesting that he was relentless and well-resourced. Reports indicated that he had also had moles removed, eyelids altered, lips thinned, and his nose enhanced multiple times. These surgeries were not just acts of vanity, they were deliberate, tactical steps to obscure his identity. The police made a strategic move, releasing a photo taken just before his latest surgery. The snapshot was a testament to his desperation, a man willing to change change his face to escape justice. This image, distributed across news outlets and public boards, finally turned the tide. Ichihashi's time on the run was closing in as the public and police became increasingly vigilant. And on November 10, 2009, 2 years on the run, Tatsuya Ichihashi's bid to be a ghost ended once and for all. Ichihashi was captured in Osaka while trying to board a ferry bound for Okinawa, the end of an exhaustive nationwide manhunt. He'd gone through a lifetime of plastic surgery to alter his appearance and circumvented authorities with almost uncanny elusiveness. But that day, he was arrested and taken into authorities' custody. Thanks to his capture, he felt some relief, but did not confess immediately. He said stony silence throughout the next 23 days, during the legally allowed detention period where no formal charges could be leveled against him. This first period ticked off on the clock and expired on December 2nd. Authorities brought him up on the lesser count, leaving a body but abandoning it. But his crime was too great, and stopped there. 2 more warrants for rape and for murder were soon served on him. A fierce battle then started between the defense of Ichihashi and the prosecution. He was threatened with the death penalty to force him into speaking, his lawyers said. She saw in him a crushing weight of fatigue and stress, they said, that had driven his quiet defiance. But on December 23rd, one of his attorneys revealed that Ichihashi finally admitted to his participation in Lindsay Ann Hawker's death, but denied that his involvement was intentional. Ichihashi attempted artificial resuscitation after he realized what had happened to the women he'd attacked, according to his account. The whole case had become increasingly a spectacle, on the edge of what Japan's judicial system could bear. The Japan Times had Stephen Green writing that it would be determining the fairness of the country's judiciary, using a lay judge system that was able to sentence those to death. Executions in Japan for a single murder were rare, however. By 2010, less than 10 of 111 death row inmates had been convicted of killing only one person. Ichihashi admitted he conspired to kill Hawker by suffocating her when she screamed during the sexual assault in court. And he did not deny the brutal events that had happened that day, but he said the resulting death was unintended. However, the court fell for this revelation, but not by a long shot towards the ultimate penalty. The Chiba District Court sentenced him to life imprisonment on July 21, 2011, and his sentence deeply upset the Hawker family, and they wanted the death penalty because they believed justice demanded it for their daughter's dreadful, premature death. But the court said that Ichihashi's lack of prior convictions and his 32-year-old age showed he might be rehabilitated. In 2023, 55 years and counting, Tatsuya Ichihashi is still in Nagano prison, serving his life sentence. All the years that have passed have not dimmed a memory of the case, the dramatic story of violence, of grief, of never learning to live without a loved one, and never being allowed to forget. If you liked this video, please subscribe and follow.